Okay, so now that we have kind of a base understanding of what a function is in concept, now let's get into it and actually make a function that works in our game, okay? Now, what we did earlier is I did mention that there are two functions here by default, okay? There's a function called start, okay? And there's a function called update. Now remember, void just means function, okay? Don't overthink it, don't overcomplicate it. Void just means function in this context, okay? So again, we have our braces. Those things start and end something. So basically anything in this space right here is part of the start function, okay? If we put a lot of lines of code in here, we put 100 lines of code in here, all those 100 lines of code are gonna happen when we call the start function, right? Same with update. This is the update function. Everything in this space is part of the update function, okay? Now, these are special functions. They're in here by default for a reason, okay? Typically, when we make our own function, we can give it whatever name we want. The problem is it won't run, won't ever run, okay? When we make a new function, it's not gonna ever run. These, okay, well, there's an exception. So what we have to do is we have to actually make it run. We'll get to that later. But what I'm saying is these know when to run. When we make our own custom function, it doesn't know when to run them, okay? So start runs pretty much when you think it might happen. It runs at the start of the game, okay? So just like the comment says, this is mostly used for initialization of stuff. It's used for kind of setup for things, for characters, for game things, for the game flow, for score, for stuff like that. It's used for setup, okay? So basically everything in this space, no matter how many lines of code is, will run through one time at the beginning of the game, okay? So let's work with this one first. Let's ignore update for now. We'll come back to that later. But what we're going to do, let's actually put something in here that's going to work and we can actually see it happening, okay? So we're going to do a print statement, all right? Now a print statement just basically echoes back a message to the console. So we have control as a developer to say, hey, print out this message at this point in the code to the console, okay? Now, this might seem like it doesn't have much meaning, and you're right in the context of the game. The player won't be able to see the console, okay? The player cannot see those messages printed out there. But this is very helpful for us as a developer to really see what's going on in our game, understanding the flow of things in our code, really get a good grasp on what's going on here, right? So let's go ahead and do our first print function, okay? So we're going to do print. Now, a couple things you might have noticed here. One, I did little p print. You can't do capital P print. This is an important thing, is that everything is case and spelling sensitive. You do have to be very careful in code. It is frustrating at times if you have something one letter off and it doesn't work because of that one letter. But one thing you also might have noticed is this right here, okay? And I'll backspace a little bit and you kind of see what's happening here. So this is kind of an autofill. If you use a phone to text or whatever, you're familiar with this. You start typing in letters and different suggestions start to pop up for you, right? This is basically, that's exactly what this is, okay? It saw me type a P, and basically I have a list of everything that has a P in it, okay? And it's not just things that start with P, all right? A lot of stuff here. Again, very overwhelming. Now, what I want you to do, again, you see I'm using my mouse here. Remember I said as little mouse movement as you can possibly use, the better, the more efficient you're going to be. So what you're going to do is when you see this pop up, use your up and down arrow keys. And if you do find the thing you want, just go in and hit enter, okay? So what I want you to look at is as I get closer to typing in print, it really starts to guess what I'm looking for. So it figured that I'm looking for print, okay? And it assumed right after just 2 letters. That's pretty cool. So what I do is I'll start typing out. Once I see that it's highlighting it by default, I'll go ahead and hit enter. Okay, so I'm gonna hit enter, and it auto-filled print for me. Okay, now this is a very controversial thing, and I hear a lot of teachers and a lot of programmers who have the opposite opinion of me. Okay, now a lot of teachers try to use this imaginary scenario that's never gonna happen, okay? They try to make things harder on you, and I'm not really sure why. I never understood it. It doesn't make sense to me, and even after programming for like 10 years or more, it still doesn't make sense to me. A lot of teachers once you in this mindset of like, oh, you can't use autofill, you can't use the internet, you can't use research, you have to memorize stuff, you have to be able to type it without autofill and all these assistant things, because you're never going to learn it if you just use the assistants. And I call bull crap on that, okay? And again, this is a very controversial thing. I think more people are starting to kind of lean toward my ideology on it. I'm not sure. But to me, it's just silly. It's a very silly scenario. It's like they're expecting you to be programming on some desert island and you have to write in all the code on a stone tablet or something. Like, it's insane. Like, there's no scenario I can think of where you're not going to have this autofill. It's not realistic at all. So when I teach, I like to teach in realistic terms, right? In a real workplace scenario, okay? It's so silly. It's asinine to me. So I'm going to be teaching you real world stuff. Use the pop-ups. Please use the pop-ups, okay? And I'm telling you, I actually encourage it because, for one, you're not going to spell it wrong. You're not going to capitalize something wrong. Like, say I came in here and I did capital P print. I would hit enter and see, okay, it's supposed to be little p print, okay? The other thing is, if you do not see it in the pop-up list, it will not work, okay? I cannot think of a single scenario where a piece of code like this will work when it didn't pop up for me, okay? If I say, okay, display, okay, that was a bad example because it's actually one of those. So if I said show in console, and I think that's some kind of code, I don't see it here, it's not going to work, I promise you, okay? If it's not in the pop-up list, something is wrong, okay? So again, just use this pop-up list, please. I highly encourage it. So I'm going to hit enter. Now, what you can do is you might, even if you know this piece of code exists, you might still not really know how to use it, okay? Now, another thing, and again, this is kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, is I teach in real world terms. Ask any programmer, and 9 times out of 10, probably 10 times out of 10, they're going to tell you that they're frequently looking things up. They're frequently researching. They're frequently trying to figure things out. They're frequently looking at APIs and trying to figure out how a piece of code works. They're always learning new things, okay? It's not realistic to think that you're just going to memorize everything, you're going to be fine. So I want you to get in this habit of, if you see something unfamiliar, don't just say, I don't know how to do this, or I don't know what this does. I always tell my students that is not an acceptable response in my classroom. I do not accept that response. The acceptable response is, I don't know how to do this, but let me figure it out. Okay, I don't know how to do this, let me ask somebody. I don't know how to do this, let me research it and look it up, okay? You guys have this fantastic tool. You've probably heard of it. It's called Google. So I'm going to go and open this up, okay? I said, okay, someone told me there's this thing called print, okay? So I'm going to come in here and type Unity print. Now, usually, if you're not really great at Googling stuff, you really should get good at it. But essentially, pretty much anything we're trying to figure out here, I'm just going to search for Unity first, okay? So I'm going to say Unity print. And what you see here, I have a couple cool things. Now, I'll tell you, typically the first 2 sites you're going to get redirected to are either going to be the docs.unity3d.com/script reference, and you're going to see Unity answers, okay? Answers.unity3d.com. Let me open up both of these. You can kind of see what they are. Now, this is the API, okay? Basically, what you can do is you can see all kinds of functions here. You can see all kinds of stuff. Basically, what you have here is the things that are popping up for you when you're typing in stuff, okay? So we found print through Google. Typically, they'll give you examples on how to use them. You can see here, logs message the Unity console, identical to debug.log. So there's no example. So let's see if debug.log has an example. And there it does, okay? So basically, print is just a shortcut for debug.log. So you can actually use debug.log if you want. I'm just going to go ahead and use print, okay? But you can see here, basically, you would put print instead of debug.log. And what you see is they have a couple other things in here, okay? And here we have Unity Answers. This is another very common search result. Now, Unity Answers, you've probably heard of Yahoo Answers before. Essentially, it's a format where people ask a question and then people can come answer the question. And what they do is they have like a voting system, and people vote for the replies they think are the most helpful. And then ultimately, the person that made the answer, Miss Sister Kai here, chooses which one they think is the best answer. So they chose this one, and it highlights as green for you. There's also comments on there. So basically, what you want to get in the mindset of is that you're not the first person to do anything, okay? Get over yourself. You're not the first person to have this problem, okay? Everyone has experienced the same problem as you, maybe in a slightly different form, different context, but I can guarantee you that any question you have about code has already been asked, okay? If you really can't find it anywhere, you really can't find that question asked, can't find answer, go ahead and ask a question on here. You can quick ask a question, make an account, and you can ask the question, right? I can't guarantee how long it'll take people to get back to you, but it's an option available. I can guarantee you're gonna find somebody that had the same problem as you, okay? And here, they usually give some good examples, tell you what to do. So I'm just gonna go ahead and show you. So what you see in the examples is they have parentheses, there's a semicolon at the end, and then they have some message inside these quotation marks, okay? So I know I went over that kind of quick. There was like 4 different things happening there, okay? And let's break that down a little bit, okay? We had the parentheses, okay? Now one thing you might notice is when you hit that first parentheses, this little thing pops up here, okay? This is basically telling you this is what the kind of thing you need to put in these parentheses, okay? So message, we can think, okay, what might that mean? What this means is inside the parentheses, you're going to put the message you want to print out in the console, which can be whatever you want it to be, okay? Now, whenever you see parentheses, it's really important to understand what they are. Parentheses are basically saying, fill in some more information here, okay? And it's important to read each line of code as a sentence. I refer to them as coding sentences, okay? So a good rule of thumb, if your coding sentence sounds incomplete or it sounds like a really awkward kind of hanging sentence, then it's an awkward piece of code that will not work, okay? So print means to print to the console, right? So let's just say that means to say something. So if I came up to you and said, hey, say, no, you didn't just lose connection. I actually just paused after saying say. That was really awkward, right? So I said say, and you're expecting what? You're expecting what I want you to say. And it's exactly what is happening here. It's saying print, but what do you want me to print? And that's what goes inside the parentheses, okay? So that just has to be in quotation marks. So I'm going to put that here. Okay. Now, what piece am I missing here? I'm missing this semicolon, okay? Now, what does every sentence need? An English sentence needs punctuation, right? It needs a period at the end, a question mark, a exclamation point, right? Now, a semicolon, all it is, it's the way you end a coding sentence. That's all it is, okay? It's nothing fantastic or special or magical. It's just the punctuation that ends a coding sentence, okay? They don't use period because period is also used for other things that we'll get into at some point. But just know the semicolon is the way you end the coding sentence. So you put that at the end, all right? Now, something you might have noticed when I was typing that out, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and erase this one. When I was typing that out, you might have noticed that instead of typing everything in sequence like this, okay, what I did was you saw me close out the parentheses first and then come in here and then come over here and do that, okay? Now, Visual Studio does do, by default, it does autofill for the parentheses and braces and stuff like that. It'll automatically put the ending one for you. But what I want you to do, and this is very important, I need you to get in the habit of closing everything out immediately before you fill in the information, okay? Now, this is the one rule of thumb that's really going to help people with braces, okay? Because when you get kind of overexcited and you start typing in your stuff, if you try to type everything out in sequence, I can almost promise you, you're going to forget to close out a parentheses or a brace at some point, okay? Now, it might not seem like a big deal right now, but when you get into like complex algorithms where you have math going on, okay? When you have math going on here and you might have, we might have another vector 3 inside of here. Okay. Okay. Now, you can see here I'm getting some math within math, right? I'm getting equations within equations. And if you've taken any kind of algebra or something, you're familiar with this, where you have parentheses within parentheses within parentheses, right? And if I would just type this out and just kind of do it as I go, and it's a little easier since Visual Studio does some autofill, but you can see here it just gets really complicated. It's kind of hard to explain this without really getting into a lot of depth and going way too ahead of ourselves, but just for the time being with the simple stuff, please close out everything before you finish filling the information, okay? Just get in that habit now with these simple, easy things, and it won't cause you problems later, okay? So we're gonna do this print hello. I'm gonna go ahead and save. Remember, Command S or Control S is your friend. I'm hitting Control S. One thing you'll notice is if there are unsaved changes, there will be a little asterisk up here by the name. Just hit Command S or Control S. That's going to go away. That means we have saved it, okay? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go back into Unity, okay? Now, whenever you change a script, it has to kind of recompile it, all right? Now, the way you recompile it is you click back into Unity somewhere. Bring focus back to the Unity window. Now, what I've seen some people do that is what you don't want to do is I've seen them kind of just drag their window over and then check for errors in their console. That's not actually refreshing the script. It's not actually recompiling, so you have to actually click back somewhere inside Unity, okay? Bring focus back to it. Now, some of you might be having errors here, okay? I'm going to go ahead and kind of purposefully make a mistake here. So I went ahead and took out my semicolon, okay? I took out my semicolon, so basically this coding sentence never finished. I'm going to go back into Unity. You'll see there, I got an error, right? Now, if you got an error, it could be one of many things. You could have messed up something at some point. Maybe you erased a brace, or maybe you didn't type this out. Maybe you did capital P instead of a little p. Maybe you don't have your quotation marks. There's so many things that could go wrong with just one line of code. What I want you to do if you have an error is just take some time, breathe first of all. I want you to look at it, okay? So if you single click on it, you'll see the expanded version of it right here. So the reason it has it down there too is, like, say you have a really small window, it shows the entire error message down here. So look at the error message, read through it very slowly. Just take your time with it. What you can also do, if you double click it, it'll actually take you to the line of code where the problem is, okay? Let's just go ahead and break down this error message though for a little bit, because again, it's important to break this stuff down so you don't get overwhelmed, all right? So you see here, this little section right here, okay? It says assets/new behavior script.cs. Where else have we seen that before? It's in a project window, right? So we have here, it's saying the problem is in this script, new behavior script, okay? So we know the problem's in that script. This next little section here, this is saying where in that script the problem is, okay? The first number is the line that it's on. So you can see here, line 19, okay? And then 2 just means 2 spaces over. This is the one that really matters, is this, this part right here. This is the line of code that it's on. Over here, you have an error, okay? An error code. And then over here, you have the message. It kind of gives you an English example, an English version of what the problem is, okay? So this is usually what's best to actually Google if you're having a problem. You can Google with the error as well if you want. So I'm going to come in here. Let's type that in. Do Unity. Right here, look, again, somebody got a very similar error. It's the exact same error, actually. Everything about it's exactly the same. Let's see. This guy's kind of commenting on another part of the code that needs to be fixed. But right here he said, anyway, the line needs to end with a semicolon, okay? Now the issue is you might be thinking, okay, am I supposed to put a semicolon here because the problem's on line 19? No, it needs to be here. So one issue that can come up is that when you have an error, sometimes it can kind of get confused and it'll say the error is on the line below where the problem actually is, okay? So this happens with things like coding punctuation, such as semicolons or braces. It'll kind of get mixed up and put it on the line below. So if you know the line is fine, line 19, try looking at the line above it, okay? It's a semicolon expected. So I'm going to go ahead and put that semicolon back. Now you'll notice if I do what I said not to do and I just look over there, it looks like it's not fixed, right? Okay, let me go and save. So I'm gonna hit Control S, and still it's not updating yet. What do we have to do? We have to click into Unity, bring focus back to recompile the script and make sure it works. Okay, so I'm gonna click back in here, give it a second. You'll see this little loading bar down here, and there we go. My error disappeared. Okay, I solved the problem. There's no more error. And again, if you're still having an error, just look through it, take your time, pause the video, make sure that your code looks exactly like mine. Make sure this line looks exactly like mine, okay? So take some time if you need to. One little quick tip, you might see me doing this and really quickly going between my windows. All you have to do is hit Alt-Tab, okay? On a Mac, it's Command-Tab. That'll very quickly switch you between your windows. And you'll see me doing that a lot, all right? And that's just a good hotkey you want to get in the habit of using, all right? So I want you to go to your code, and I want you to write a comment for this. So especially because this stuff is new for you guys, I want you to comment everything we do, okay? It's going to get very kind of bloated with comments, but that's okay. I want you to use this code that we're doing as notes for yourself, right? You know, a lot of times you take a class, you keep your notebook, right? Has all your notes now. I want you to treat this like this. This project is going to be your notebook, all right? So I'm going to come in here, line right above it. I'm just going to write the 2 slashes to start a comment. I'm going to say, show a message in the console. And the message is hello, okay? I'm also going to go ahead and write an extra comment for this whole start function altogether, so I can know what start does. Remember, start happens once at the beginning of the game. Okay, so remember, this just happens one time at the beginning of the game. All right, and again, write these comments in your own words. Okay, do what makes sense to you. So I'm gonna save this. Make sure you save. Control S, Command S. Make sure you save your project. Go back into Unity. Check for errors. If you got an error just from what we just did, you may have forgot to put 2 slashes, because if I don't have slashes, it tries to read that as code. And look at that. From one little mistake, it came up with 5 errors, okay? Now, this is kind of what I call like a trickle-down effect. It has an issue on one line, which causes kind of like an avalanche and keeps going down and down and down. So always start with the very top error, okay? That always, always, always start from the very top, all right? I can see, okay, I need to make that a comment. So save that, come back, make sure they're all gone. All right. Now, one thing that can come up as well, maybe you want to kind of double check this right here. Let me put an error back in my code, so let me just make a mistake again. So something might happen like this, where you might try to hit play and it won't let you, because it says you have to fix errors, but there's no errors down here, okay? That's because you can enable and disable the errors, okay? So just make sure that's on. Make sure you can actually see your errors there. Okay, it's very important, all right? Let me just go back and fix this. Put the comment back. Control S, Alt-Tab back. Let it compile, and there we go. We're all clear, okay? So what I want you to do, let's kind of test this script out, okay? So I'm going to hit play. And what are we expecting to happen? What's supposed to happen? It's supposed to print out the message hello, correct? And we can see that right here. Start, right? At the very beginning, print out the message hello. It's not though. We don't see that message, okay? We do have messages enabled right here. That is enabled. It's highlighted, okay? The problem is that scripts do not run just by merely existing down here, okay? Scripts have to be somewhere in your scene to work properly. That's a very, very important concept, okay? Just being down here on its own, it's not doing anyone any good, okay? It's essentially, think of it like if you were writing a play or something like that, right? If you wrote this really nice script for a play, but never actually gave it out to your actors, you know, what would happen? The play would suck, right? Because nobody would be doing anything. They don't have the script to go by, right? So it's the same thing. You have to give it to one of these actors up here in your scene, right? So you can put this on whatever, because this isn't actually really doing anything. It's just kind of printing out a message. So you can put this on any of your objects. I'm just going to go ahead and put it on the cube, okay? So how you put it on an object, you just drag it from the project window. You just drag it onto an object, make sure it highlights blue, Okay, so I'm going to put it on this cube. And then what you want to do is you want to click on that object you just dragged it on and verify that it is on there. Okay, if you don't see it on there, you might have put it on the wrong object. That's a possibility. Just look for it. So I do see it here. New behavior script is now on this cube. Okay, now one thing you want to do, make sure you did that out of play mode. Okay, because let me show you what could happen. If I take this off and let me go into play mode like we were before, and let me add the script. Okay, so the script's on here. Oh, no, it's not. So script's on here. It actually did work, but we'll get to that in a second. The script is on here, right? Go out of play mode, what's going to happen? It's going to revert back, right? The script's going to be gone, okay? So just be careful that you're doing these kinds of things in play mode, okay? All right, so we got it on there. I'm going to hit play, and as you saw before, what's going to happen? All right, it's going to print out hello. There's a bunch of other stuff under here. We didn't tell it to print this, right? We only told it to print hello. So this is more information it gives you. So it prints out the message you wanted, but also tells you where it came from. It says it came from print, okay? And it says it came, that print was in the start function. It even gives you a line of code. It says CS20, right? That's line 20 right here. You can see the number there. You can also double click this, even though it's not an error, it'll take you right to the line it came from, the origin of it, okay? And there we go. You made your first function, you made your first line of code that works. That's your first coding sentence, okay? So next up, I'll show you a little bit about custom functions. We'll go over the update function a little more. But for now, just be super happy with yourself. You just made your first line of code. Your first line of code did work properly. So good on you. You did a good job. I'm proud of you. So again, next time, we're going to look over this in a little more detail. We're going to make our own custom function, look at update. We'll mess around with this a little more, but good job so far, okay?